What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are basically going to continue our coverage over the X of Swords crossover event, and we actually pick up with Chapter 12 and Chapter 13. Yes, we're going to start covering 2 chapters per video as a way to kind of get through the story a little bit faster. But either way, though, we actually pick up with X-Men number 14, which is chapter 12. Now remember, at the end of our last video, basically, Apocalypse found out that his wife was alive still. Because remember, throughout the early chapters of this crossover event, we were told that she had basically died. But in reality, she never did. And so you're going to have Jonathan Hickman kind of use a lot of content in this chapter as a way to remind us different things that happened in the past that led up to this storyline right here, but at the same time it's being told to us by a different person, the wife of Apocalypse, Genesis. And so chapter 12 is going to be very quick, but chapter 13 is where the real games actually begin. But with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the next 2 chapters of X of Swords. And so getting into X-Men number 14, we actually do pick up with Apocalypse right now talking to his wife because he wants to know, how did she become evil? Because when he last saw his wife eons ago, he had basically sent his wife, Genesis, and their children, the original 4 horsemen of Apocalypse, into Armeth as a way to keep those creatures at bay so that they will not come over to Earth and attack Krakoa. But the thing is, though, now you have the wife of Apocalypse and his children wanting to actually take over Krakoa, a land they used to live on. Because remember, when it came to Krakoa, it was Krakoa and Arrako, 2 islands that were separated, but there was a time they were together and they were known as Akora. But they were split in half to Arrako and Krakoa, and Arrako went with Genesis and the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse into Armeth as a way to keep those creatures at bay. But apparently, as time went on, something has changed in her mind to basically stop trying to protect Krakoa, but actually take over Krakoa. And that is when you have Hickman kind of go back over every single detail he already told us in earlier chapters, but again, he kind of gives it to us in a different perspective, trying to explain why is the wife of Apocalypse now evil. And so as she begins to talk to Apocalypse, it's everything that she had already told us. And not really her, but Jonathan Hickman had told us in earlier chapters. How, of course, one day Krakoa and Arrako were 2 islands who were connected as one, known as Akora. They were split in half into 2, but you had Apocalypse basically sent his entire family over into Armeth with Arrako alongside with them as a way to keep those creatures at bay long enough for Apocalypse to build an army of new mutants to fight with Arrako's mutants to keep the creatures of Armeth over there. All that was already told to us in earlier chapters of this crossover event. And matter of fact, in earlier chapters of Dawn of X. But here's the thing though. At the end of every single storyline, when someone is telling us the origin of basically what happened to the family of Apocalypse, the ending was always the same. Genesis had died. But we saw at the end of our last video, she did not die. She actually survived. And so with her being alive again, it tells us, okay, something happened differently at the end of that story that's been told to us so many times. Because remember, at the end of that story, she fought against somebody who was basically being the host of the god of annihilation. Because remember, when it comes to the god of annihilation, when you wear the mask takes over your body. You become a host for the actual god. Now, in some cases, you can actually still control your body, but not completely. You begin to be influenced by the god of annihilation. And so with that, we come to find out at the end of that story, we were told that she had died at the hands of the god of annihilation, except that was false. Instead, she actually won. She won the big battle against the god of annihilation. Now, with that happening right there, of course, usually if you defeat the last host of the god of annihilation, you become the new host as long as you wear the mask. Genesis did not do that because she did not want to do that. And that right there was a huge mistake. And let me explain why. Because if you wear the helmet, you control the creatures of Armeth, alongside with the god of annihilation. But she did not want to wear the mask. And so with her not wearing the mask, the god was beginning to do what the god wanted to do originally, which was take over Krakoa. And so that is why the creatures of Armeth began to attack and try to move into Otherworld, which of course is the central point between all realities across Marvel Universe. But those creatures began to go over to Otherworld as a way to go over into Krakoa to basically conquer that land. We learned that in the earlier chapters of this crossover event. Now, you had Genesis thought if she put on the mask, she'll be able to actually control the creatures of Armeth to stop them from going over into Otherworld, into going into Earth. But of course, she could not control it like she thought she would. And the reason why I say that is because after she had put on the mask, Annihilation began to influence her to do what she wants to do, which is conquer. Because remember, in the earlier chapter, the mask told Apocalypse and Genesis, I want to conquer anything in my path. The mask told them that in the earlier chapter. And so you have Genesis telling us that apparently when she put on the mask began to say, you want to help me. You want to help me conquer land. And so, of course, it kind of took over the mind and body of Genesis, to the point it made her want to go over to Krakoa to basically conquer the land of Krakoa, to conquer Earth. And so that is how she kind of switched sides from being a good guy to a, well, bad guy. And so getting into chapter 13 of this crossover event, we actually pick up with Marauders number 14. Now, with this book right here, we actually do pick up we're at the home of Saturnyne. Now, of course, this is the moment you have the champions of Arrako and the champions of Krakoa coming together to have a dinner. Now, of course, this dinner is being done as a way for both sides to kind of get their last big meal before the big competition actually happens. Because remember, they're all here to fight against one another, but Saturnyne is going to make both sides play in some kind of competition, a bunch of different games as a way for both sides to earn points. Now, with all that being said, though, of course, this dinner is a way for characters to learn about their opponents, because this is going to be a very important battle. Because if Arrako lose, Arrako cannot go over to Krakoa and try to conquer Earth. On top of that, if Krakoa loses, then Arrako's army can come over to Krakoa to basically conquer Earth. And so there is a lot of things on stake here. And so right now, you have both sides just trying to learn about their opponents the best they can. Now, we actually do pick up with Wolverine being angry at Brian Braddock, the brother of Betsy Braddock, who's currently Captain Britain. Now, of course, Brian Braddock was Captain Britain, but he's no longer Captain Britain. Now, he is one of the characters who will basically be fighting for Krakoa because he has the Sword of Might. Now, with all that being said, though, the reason why Wolverine is mad at Brian Braddock is because when it comes to Saturnyne, Saturnyne has the ability to actually stop Arrako and send them back over to Armeth. But she's not doing that And also, you have Wolverine tell us that when it comes to Saturnyne, she could do that, but she wants one thing. And of course, the one thing she wants is Brian Braddock. She wants to bang him. And so it's Wolverine kind of like, listen, man, just let the girl bang you. Go ahead and cheat on your wife, because if you do, well, you save the entire earth, and you actually give people who had not had the chance to get married yet still have the chance to get married. And so it's Wolverine saying, yeah, man, cheat on your wife to save the world. We have no choice here. If you got to do it, well, bro, go ahead and do it. Now, you do have Magik and also Gorgon meet up with Iska. Now, remember, Iska is basically has the mutant ability to not be beaten. She cannot be beaten at all. And so with that mutant ability, it basically means that she never loses. And so, of course, right now, when it comes to Magik and Gorgon, they're wondering, how in the world are they actually going to be able to defeat her? Because right now, she could be the only thing that could basically lead to the X-Men actually losing this battle. Because, again, her mutant ability gives her the chance to never lose. Now, you do have Storm actually meet up with Death. Now remember, Death is one of the original horsemen of Apocalypse, but at the same time, one of the children of Apocalypse. But when it comes to Death, Death is very intrigued by Storm. And the reason why? Because Storm is one of the few X-Men who had basically never really died. Like, she had that one kind of death in the Fall of Mutant storyline, but in reality, Storm had never truly died. And so with that being said, Death is very intrigued by her because when it comes to Storm, she never died, but Storm is not scared of death. Meaning that if Storm is going to die, she will fight death head on. And so she's not afraid to fight against death in the actual competition because she's not afraid to actually die. And that right there shows you how strong of a character Storm is. And that is why she's one of my top 10 favorite X-Men characters. Like, you go, Storm. But then it comes time for the dinner. Now, when the dinner actually happens, this is where we're going to leave our cliffhanger on. But when the dinner actually happens, you do have Saturnyne begin to talk. But when she does talk, of course, she begins to talk about the idea of how there is going to be a lot of deaths. People are going to die. And when they die, of course, that means there's no way they can be brought back to life. Now, of course, this makes Wolverine very upset because Wolverine, he has a healing factor, but everyone else does not have a healing factor on the X-Men side. And so if they get stabbed, cut, whatever, they could possibly bleed out and die. And that makes Wolverine very upset because some of these characters, Wolverine actually cares for a lot. And so you have Wolverine get very upset because Saturnyne knows that if someone dies in this competition, they cannot be brought back to life. And so Wolverine is so angry, so upset. Wolverine stabs Saturnyne through the chest. And this is where we're going to leave on a cliffhanger. This is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. Also, if you have any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below, because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, I'll see y'all next time. Later.